over a period of a little bit under 2 hours. I got this side of the hull all wet out and fiberglassed. Wasn't too bad. It's a lot of area, but my process works pretty well, and it didn't take that long. I've got the other side still to do, which will be another day, not today. Today's next task will be to fill coat this later in the day. I started very early in the day. It's not even 9:15, and this is finished. Started at 7:15. That means I can come down at like 3 o'clock and do my fill coat. Well, this is still green, but cured enough. I have to give my wife credit. I was talking to her about doing this job and how I was going to get the resin on, and she suggested a squirt bottle or a squeeze bottle. And this actually worked great for getting the resin on the hull and fighting gravity. This is an expensive bottle meant for like barbecue sauces and using on your grill, stuff like that. I had to find something locally because I didn't have anything, and we only discussed this yesterday. I didn't have time to order, but we found these locally. It was like $17 or $18 for 2 of these. These are 1 quart. But I used one on this side, so I still have one left. I also have some other bottles coming via order, but this worked great. I took the top off, so I have a good sized hole. This is the second bottle that I can use on the other side. The one I used, it's all resin gunked, and it's a one-time use. There's no cleaning it or reusing it. For $8 or $10 a side, that was totally worth it. That worked great. I like the squeegee to spread the resin. It presses it into the cloth. You can move it around really easily. Pushes the cloth in instead of wanting to roll it off the surface. So I did have a roller at hand, and I put it on the material once, and it immediately pulled it off, and I don't think I used it again. The squeegee and my little metal air roller and a brush for the tight corners. Those are the heroes of the day, as always. But this came out well. I'm really pleased with it. Having it pre-laid out worked very well. I found that 16-ounce mixed of resin was more than enough for each panel. So I could easily wet out a whole panel and start the next one. What I liked to do was kind of get the first part of the seam lined up on the next panel in line with the resin that was left over, and then I'd go get some more resin and wet out the rest of the panel. I let it overhang rather messily over the tape that I applied down to the chine, and when I come back to do the fill coat, I'll trim that. It'll be green. Same with the excess here at the top. I'll trim that when I come back. It'll be easy to cut with a knife. I'll get rid of all that excess. I did not wrap it around the stem. I'm going to come back when both sides are done and put a separate piece around the stem. Same thing with the transom. The transom will be glassed separately sometime in the near future. So I just brought this glass right to the edge and later I will deal with the rest. So there you have it. And I will fill coat it later today. It's been several hours and I've come back to trim off this cloth and get the fill coat on. Cured to the point that I can roll a fill coat over this, and also so that I can cut through this extra cloth, top and bottom. So that's my first task, is to trim this, and then I'll get going on the fill coat. This is 8 mixed ounces of epoxy and hardener, along with 4 packed ounces of microlite filler. It's a 50% ratio, and this is how I'm going to apply the fill coat. I'm going to use this mohair roller to spread it, and then smooth it out with that foam roller. And this does a good job, especially on vertical surfaces. This does a great job. It holds the epoxy so it doesn't tend to run so much. And it also installs a heavier coat. And finally, it's easier to sand than raw epoxy because it has filler in it. So it's almost in addition to a fill coat, it's almost a rolled fairing coat. As it levels, it glosses up and smooths out. You can already see some gloss on there. So this is a great technique. Works really well. You can use it anywhere. I didn't do this on the bottom because that was just the bottom. And it was flat and horizontal. And I just wanted enough epoxy on there to lightly sand it. But this hull is going to be going through all the primer and paint stages and visual fairing so that it looks good. So this is worth using this particular material. And because it's vertical, it'll just help hold it on there. So this doesn't take long. And it'll probably take a second coat, but for now, this is the important one. There's enough of a build on here now that I can lightly sand it when it's done, and we'll see where we stand. And I might do a second coat, but that'll be later. Before I fill coated, I trimmed the excess glass from the top edge and from the bottom, and I pulled the tape on the bottom as well. So I cut along the top of the tape line with a sharp knife and pulled the tape. That way I could fill coat over the chine as well. And the top edge, it's just an easy time to trim the excess since the glass is still green and I can cut it with a knife. Brian Adams would approve. All told, trimming and fill coat took an hour. So with the port side all glassed, all wet out, I freed up all these clamps. So now I could come over here to the starboard side and lay out all the cloth dry. I cut all these according to the measurements on the port side, and I added a little bit on a few of these because I found it was a little tight on the port side. So we're all ready to go on the starboard side in the same way. So this is tomorrow's work right here. Do the same thing, and I will have the weekend of the just. It's the next day, and it's time to finish up the glasswork on the starboard side. It's all laid out. So all I have to do is wet it out, just like I did on the port side. And just like that, here's the starboard side, all glassed. This is what it looks like up close. It was unremarkable. It was just like the other side. I'm quite glad to have this done. It wasn't the worst thing I've ever done. It wasn't my favorite thing to do, but it really wasn't too bad. So it's 9:15 in the morning. I started this at 7, and I will leave this until probably 2 o'clock this afternoon, and I'll come back and trim and fill coat. That was what worked yesterday. Timing's about the same. So I've just gotten a little bit ready for the fill coat later, and I look forward to doing that in 6 hours or so. See you then. So the starboard side now is cured enough that I can come back and do my fill coat. 2 o'clock. With a sharp knife, I trimmed all the excess cloth from the top edge and also from the bottom at the chine, and pulled the tape there as well. That leaves me with a bit of an overlap and a little space beneath, and I'll fill coat right over the top of that. Fill coat on the starboard side was the same as on the port side, uneventful. Looks good. You can see it starting to level back here where I started at the stern. So we're looking good. I'm going to leave this to cure overnight and move on from there. This is where things ended up after the first fill coat on the hull. I've sanded this and cleaned it with solvent. Sanded it with 80 grit on my 6-inch sander and a palm sander on the chines. And the point of this sanding was to scuff the surface and generally smooth it, but I'm not going for totally smooth. So there's still some texture from the roller and maybe from the cloth. So in any case, I'm going to do a second fill coat, which I always expected to do. And the second fill coat will help, when it's sanded, it will help even out spots like this where you can still see like orange peel or whatever you want to call the texture, and fill in some low spots. Not low, but spots that could use more filling, like right here. I can feel the weave of the cloth there. So a second fill coat will be well worthwhile, and I'll sand that again once that's on. And at that point, I will strive for a flat surface, but we'll just see how it goes. This is pretty good for one fill coat. I'm pleased with it. If I was using house paint or something to paint this, this would be more than good enough. Probably close to good enough for epoxy primer over the top and let that take up some of the texture that's in there, but a second fill coat is not a big deal, and it'll bring me much, much closer to the finished result that I want here. The port side had more than a full day to cure. The starboard side here has had under 24 hours, and it was a little tougher to sand because it hadn't had quite as much cure time. When I do this second fill coat on the entire hull, I will let it sit for at least a day, more than a day, before I sand it, because it does make it easier, and I want it to be easy to sand. There were a few places, especially up along the top edge. This is a sharp corner, and I let the glass run by, but in a few places it just didn't stick. So I've removed any loose material that was there. I'm not worried about that. If there's a little spot like this, here's another one. This will get covered with trim at some point, and it's also going to get fill coated over, so I'm not at all worried about spots like that had some loose glass that I just sanded away. The seams between pieces of cloth, like this one, I will, after the second fill coat, and when that's sanded, I will skim coat some fairing compound in there and clean those up. But not until then. There's another spot where there was just a air bubble where the glass stuck up and didn't stick to that sharp corner, and that's fine. Not worried about those at all. But I believe a second fill coat done exactly the same way will make a huge difference to how this hull looks and how smooth it is. Because I'm going for flat and smooth, ultimately. You can see on these dark areas, little texture of the cloth there, and just some orange peely type texture. And I wasn't trying to flatten that out with one coat. It's just not thick enough. So the second coat will add a little more, and hopefully I can sand that and get it basically flat. And if that doesn't allow me to flatten the surface completely the way I want, then I'll do some minor skim coat fairing. So next step, fill coat around the whole hull. Second fill coat in place, both sides of the boat. I think it looks great, quite smooth, quite glossy. There will definitely be some work after this, but I think this is going to be an excellent build coat for the hull. The hull looks great, nice and fair. The hull is fair. The only fairing I will do will be any low spots like these seams. Here's a seam here. But otherwise, the hull is good to go. I just have to get it flat and smooth with the next round of sanding. And I'm going to give this more than a full day of cure time. Today is a Saturday. I'll give it at least Sunday and quite possibly Monday, given what the weather is doing. And it'll make it easier to sand. And I need a break. I'm tired of working on my knees. But here's the other side. Again, it's looking real nice. Very happy with how it all looks. Fill coats are looking good. This second fill coat does make a difference. It's totally worth doing. It's plenty of work, but it's totally worth doing because it brings the boat basically to where it needs to be. Assuming it started out that way in the first place, which this one did. So there you have it. I say that a lot. Moving forward. So I referred to a drawing of the Tohatsu 30, which is what I'm going to put on here for some basic dimensions. I'm going to fill in these corners a little bit, at least to bring that out flush. And I wanted to see if I could extend it at all and still leave room for a kicker. So I measured out with the engine turned to one side. It's 13.3 inches on each side, so I just measured out 14. Little extra room. And that leaves me basically just enough for my kicker, which is about 12 inches, including the steering handle. The clamp is much smaller, so I can probably fit that in, but the long and the short of it is I'm just going to make a piece of plywood the same size as this corner brace and just fill it in so that this is flush here. So I don't like the way that's inset from the plane of the transom and the hull. So I'm just going to make a couple small pieces and glue them in there. It'll work for both sides. So this isn't fancy, but I've just cut some small pieces of 9mm plywood to fill in and even out on top of these corner braces. Just brings it up flush with the rest of the hull. And I filled in the little gap because I had put a fillet in there before. When I installed the transom, I put a nice fillet in there thinking that was finishing it off, but I decided I wanted it flush. I filled in that gap with some epoxy. Did this on both sides. They're just clamped in there with epoxy. They're slightly oversized, so I can trim them to match these braces exactly. Just clamped and glued. This is just a cosmetic thing. I did not extend them out at all. This is the opening that will remain. So there you have it. Just one little step to take care of before thinking about sheathing the transom. It's been a couple days since I did the second fill coat. I let it sit for 2 days, partly to take a break and partly to give it a nice cure time so that it would be easier to sand. And now this morning I've gone ahead and sanded this. I've sanded it with 80 and 120 grit on my 6-inch random orbit sander. 80 to break the surface, the 120 to bring it down flat and smooth. And a palm sander and by hand on the chine and as needed. So this at this point is pretty much where I want it. I've got the various seams to fill flush. These seams are butted together. There's a slight little gap there. So I need to fill that flush. I haven't washed this yet. I just blown it off and swept. So there's still dust on here. It's not quite as opaque as it looks, but basically flat. There's a few, you can see stuff like this, just the slightest texture there. But I think high build primer will take care of that. So I'm pretty much done with the major, what I call bulk sanding on this. I'm happy with where it is. And by the time I get finished with the primer, high build primer, then finish primer, this will be right where it needs to be. But first I've got to finish up a few things like these seams. I'll fill those. And the stem needs to be glassed and then faired into the sides of the hull as needed. So that's going to come right up soon. But overall, this looks real nice. Very happy with it. About a little over 2 hours of sanding. So next, I'm going to clean those seams and get some fairing compound in there. So I used a epoxy fairing mix to trowel over these seams and fill any little voids that are in there. You can see it's just a little bit in the seam. It's just a skim coat. It'll probably need another coat when this is sanded, but we'll see. So this will cure overnight. We'll sand it next time. See where things stand. At the transom, I sanded these new little pieces that I put in to make this flush. Sanded them even with the top and sides of these support cleats and sanded this fill. That's going to take a little bit more fairing compound right in there. That's a gap that I filled. I had put a little fillet in there, that darker material right by my thumb, and so I couldn't bring the plywood right up to the corner, so I just filled over the top. This is all going to get fiberglassed over, so it's all flush. Finish up any minor fairing work there. This transom will be ready for fiberglass as well. At the stem, I started by cutting off the excess length of the wooden stem piece, roughly flush. That'll get sanded a little bit later. Then I installed a piece of this 8-inch wide 10-ounce tabbing over the stem and overlapping onto the hull by a couple inches on each side. I used that particular material because it was the right width and I had a piece of it. This is the same stuff I used over the stiffeners on the bottom. It's a little heavier than the rest of the hull, but that won't hurt at the stem. So again, I've overlapped this down over the lower part of the stem, the forward part of the chines, where I have some tape for later trimming. And when this is cured enough, I will fair it into the sides of the hull. There will be a little edge here where the tabbing ends. So I'll just fair that out with a wide trowel onto the rest of the hull and fair it all smooth and fair. Guess it's in the name. I lightly sanded the fairing compound on these little uprights that I patched in on the transom, and those were ready to go. So I went ahead and installed sheathing over the transom. This is more 6-ounce cloth, cut roughly to fit, overlapping the top edges for later trimming, and down over the edge of the fiberglass from the bottom. You can see the dark line there, about an inch above the tape. And I wrapped it around the edges, the transom edges, and a couple inches onto the sides of the hull where I have some tape to protect it. So I'll trim that off at that tape line when it's green enough, both sides. So there's the transom, one of the last remaining pieces of the sheathing puzzle. It's a new day, and I've just finished trimming up the excess fiberglass from the stem and the transom. I did not get down here again to do a fill coat, but that's okay. These small areas, they just need a real light scuff, and then I can fill and fair from there, so I'm not too worried about it. If I'd been worried about it, I would have made it happen. I wrapped the transom around the corners, a couple inches, and just trimmed the tape, so I've got a nice clean line. Makes it easier to fair in. At the stem, I trimmed the excess fiberglass at the top edge and down at the bottom, pulled the tape, and this is what I'm left with. Same sort of thing as the transom. I'll give it a light sand. This is slightly heavier cloth. This is 10 ounce. And I'll fair these sides in with the surrounding hull. And whatever I need to do down at the chine and that area. So we'll get this cleaned up now. It's been water washed. And it's time for a very quick sanding before I put some fairing compound on. Just a quick scuff over this new sheathing on the transom, around the corners. Just lightly touched the edge here and just scuffed this material the slightest bit. Just enough to accept fairing compound over the top, which is my next step. This has been acetone washed, and I will skim coat this with some fairing in lieu of fill coats, because I didn't get the fill coats on this. And similarly on the stem, very light sanding, just enough to scuff this material so that I can put some fairing compound over it. At the stem, this is the first of 2 or 3 light applications of fairing filler to fill the weave of the cloth and to start fairing this extra piece in with the adjacent hull here. So I've just started by fairing in the edge of the tabbing, and over time that will grow out until it's smooth and fair. And the same on the port side here. Most of the rest of this is just to fill the weave of the cloth. Down here at the chine, I've blended it where I overlapped it over the fiberglass from the bottom. And I'll start working in the chine fillets. And this edge here where I ended the cloth, I cut it here so that I could wrap it. And I'll just fair that in until it's all smooth and invisible. So that's the goal of this particular exercise. So this is the first of 2 or maybe 3 very thin, light applications of fairing filler on the transom. The purpose of this is twofold in this case. First, it's to act as a fill coat, because I did not fill coat the new fiberglass. So I've just skimmed very lightly over the entire surface, but that'll just fill the weave. And then the other purpose is to fair in these edges where I wrapped the material around the corner. For the first application, I've just worked to fill the the little spot right next to the edge of the tabbing, and the same on the starboard side. And down here at the bottom of the transom, I applied some fairing compound at the bottom edge of the new glass. So that'll just sort of smooth it out where it overlapped the glass from the bottom.